so many colored leaves. There's the ski lift ride where you can see miles in every direction, the alpine slide, amazing restaurants, and the breweries have that Lake Superior water. It tastes like no other beer you've had in your life.
I cannot wait. You really have me looking forward to this.
Onion rings at Fitker's.
Okay, I'm Garrett McQueen.
I'm Scott Blankenship.
And this is TRILLOQUY, True and Real Stories from the Fringes of Classical Music. So since I moved here to Minnesota, everyone's been talking about how important it is to go up to the North Shore, up by Lake Superior. So, Scott, we're going this weekend, and yeah, you've already laid out everything that is that I should be looking forward to.
If we're lucky,
I'm excited.
If we're lucky, we'll hear a wolf call at night.
Oh, a wolf call!
It's possible. I've heard it once before. It's possible.
Well, I still have to run to the store to buy myself a nice Minnesota flannel. I want to be in costume. So,
yep.
Really looking forward to that trip to the North Shore. Again, learning about the differences, the cultural differences, the physical differences between, the South where I came from and here in Minnesota is, I never get tired of learning and digging into that sort of thing. So I'm looking forward. And actually on this Opus of TRILLOQUY, I'm going to give y'all a little taste of the South. So I interviewed one of my former colleagues, Melony Dodson. She's the morning classical host down at WUOT in Knoxville. So looking forward to talking with her and, meeting her, in my first radio gig. We had a lot of conversations that I had never really thought about before. Mainly the conversation of gender equity in classical music, really putting, girl power and woman power into the programming. And it's something that I never really thought about before I met her. So we're going to get into a couple of those conversations in the interview. But before we get to that, Scott, I wanted to, cover a couple things that Melony and I talk about in the interview just to give folks a background. I need to move my mic here. Hopefully this doesn't make too much noise. Okay, I think I did a good job.
Yeah, you're doing great.
All right, so one of the things that Melony and I talk about that we reference is a tweet from the artistic director of the Netherlands Radio Philharmonic. And I'm going to read this tweet for you here, Scott. It says, "In the 30s, Nazi musicologist Heinrich Bessler fought against the great evil, the Jew. Nowadays, some American musicologists likewise want to purge the world of music. Their great enemy, the white male. So their approach is not just racist, but sexist as well. Progress indeed." And of course, he's being sarcastic there. What are your reactions to hearing that?
All I can say is equality feels like oppression when you're used to privilege.
What's dangerous to me is that as you'll hear in the interview, I'm not going to name him. I'm not going to give him a shout out. I won't do it here either. But he is in a position of power. This is someone who, has control over programming, what audiences hear and what audiences are exposed to. And when we have these conversations, it's not just because we feel like having them. It's not just because I feel like belly aching over something. But there are people in positions of power who have control over portions of this art form, at least how they get out here, that hold opinions like this. I mean, comparing Nazis to people who want to see a little more equity in programming.
That's a stretch, I think. Very definitely a stretch. And the only thing that I can think of is think about everything that we've missed over the years because of talented composers like Clara Schumann being suppressed, Amy Beach was suppressed. The fact that because of their gender, they just were not given the credence that a male composer was given.
What if Beethoven or Mozart were born women?
We wouldn't have it.
All of the music is the same. We probably would never know it.
We would not have it.
That is, I really just shudder thinking about that and reading tweets like that. There's only so much I can do without getting in so much trouble on social media. I'm no stranger to that sort of drama. I'm trying to, fight the good fight while keeping my job. So all that to say, if you're listening and you ever see tweets or anything like that, it's up to us. You can't feel shy about calling that sort of thing out. And if you are a part of an organization that might have a relationship with another organization that you have a bone to pick with or something, maybe reach out personally. Maybe you don't necessarily have to make it a public thing, but we've let things pass by for far too long. And I think it's important to call that sort of thing out as you see it. Making change in real time is so important. I think we've talked about that before, actually.
A couple times. And I think that that's a great way to start, is that if you have a desire to hear more music by women composers, get in touch with your local station and say, hey, how about some Caroline Shaw, for crying out loud? How about Florence Price? And I want to give a shout out to Mike Friedman in Central Ohio sent me a link to a piano concerto in G minor by Ruth Gibbs.
And that's a composer that I hadn't heard of.
Do you know? Okay, so you don't know the name. I understand that she studied with Ray Vaughan Williams for a little bit, so there's sort of that folky influence, but it's also very cinematic. I've only listened to it once, and I want to listen to it like when I have some time to really give some attention to it. But look it up if you can. And I also want to ask you, one of the things that you talk with Melony about is the debate between woman and female.
Yeah.
Why is that important, and which one is better?
Well, as you know, I'll let you hear Melony's response to that question in the interview. But for me, I always want to make sure that I am using the most equitable language.
Right.
And I've read a few feminist books and read online forums and stuff, just making sure that I'm doing my part when it comes to gender equity. And in a lot of those writings, I've read that the word woman is more equitable than female, because a woman is a female human. So, saying female composer always felt a little weird to me. And not that you always have to have that qualifier, but sometimes the conversation or the way you're presenting it calls for that mention.
Sure.
Especially, a lot of a lot of names of women composers, you can't assume, that
well,
they're
Cécile
women.
Chaminade.
Right, who I mentioned to Melony, a French woman of the 19th century, I believe. So someone hearing me say, a piano whatever by Cécile Chaminade, they might not immediately think that she is a woman. So I feel like it's important to say, that, of course, I don't back announce or front announce by saying this is music by a woman composer, but there's a way to incorporate that into the conversation,
right?
Equitably, and just shining light on the fact that, look, this is a composer that we hadn't always heard of because she's a woman, because of the culture in that day. But now, we're getting an opportunity to explore and give her her flowers, even though she's gone physically, but, always here musically, and even more so now because we're getting to celebrate it,
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's how I package that conversation, by explaining why gender is significant, especially for classical music of that time, of the 1800s.
Sure. Well, it's easy to get into the mindset when you're used to hearing nothing but male names.
Right.
And then you hear Cécile Chaminade and you go, oh, well, that's Cecil.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, not really.
No, it's Cécile.
French.
Yeah, yeah. So we covered that, that very interesting tweet. The other thing I wanted to bring up before we got into the interview with Melony is the conversation of Me Too, and we talk about how I was impacted by seeing the big social media presence of all these women finally coming forward about their experiences, and how it broke my heart to see so many women that I knew who had been at the hand of male violence and male sexual violence. And this is, of course, a conversation that bleeds over into classical music all the time. And a couple months back, the violinist Laura St. John came forward and named her accuser and where it all happened, which was the Curtis Institute of Music. And I have a couple articles here, and if you want more information about this, just Google Laura St. John sexual assault or something. And as I mentioned in my interview with Melanie, I'm only naming her because she has come forward, and I think it's so important to be aware of stories like these. So she talks about how when she was a student at the Curtis Institute, how she faced sexual assault. And in the article that I'm scanning here from the Philadelphia Inquirer, it says that when she first came out about it, when it happened, what she was told was, "Oh, no one's going to believe you. That these teachers are world class.
They're beyond reproach.
They're beyond reproach. No one is going to believe you." And she kept forward and she pressed on until the Curtis Institute was forced to, deal with this. Was forced to take this head on. And their initial response wasn't much of an apology. Basically, they were saying, we sincerely regret that our past institutional culture may not have always provided the safety net needed to thoroughly address the full gamut of our community needs. What sort of apology is that to a woman who was sexually assaulted at your institution, And they got all sorts of flack for that. And following that, the institution, put out a second statement saying that, they just didn't address it correctly. They never actually apologized to Laura St. John, and they've done that. And of course, that does not absolve them of the issues that they've had. But it's so important to hear these stories and listen to these stories and demand to honestly demand responses from these people in charge, because that's someone's life, and that's something she has to carry with her for the rest of her life. And,
right, and that really feeds into when you and Melanie were talking about the bravery that is required for a person to step forward and make the claim and come clean, because especially in the environment that we live in today, people can harass you and not even need to be in front of you.
Right.
And what do they call it? Doxing?
Mm-hmm.
Like
putting all your stuff out
like
there.
Your address is out there and your phone and where you work and your family members might be put in danger. This is no joke. So when a woman comes forward with these accusations, it takes a tremendous amount of guts. The bottom line is that I would say that I would venture a guess that I don't know if I have the courage to do what many women are doing right now.
Absolutely. So, I take my hat off to every woman who has stepped forward. In my work, in my life, I do my best to always find ways that I can impact change and make a difference, as a man. And yeah, I think conversations like the one I have with Melanie are very important. Like I mentioned, she, opened my eyes to so many things when we were working together down at WUOT. So it was really a pleasure of mine to be able to connect with her and offer a conversation between the two of us for you today. So how about we get into it? Melanie, so great to talk with you again. Thanks for sitting down with me.
Oh, thanks for giving me this opportunity. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, when I saw Todd, shout out to Todd Steed, when I saw him here at PRPD a few weeks ago, we were talking about you and singing your praises, as a classical host in Knoxville for, about 10 years now. You're a real institution in that town. How does that feel?
It feels really good. I don't know how this happened. It just all of a sudden I realized I'd been here for 10 years, but, I love my job so much. I love Knoxville, and I love, it sounds corny, but I love the station and everyone who works here. I'm very fortunate. So hopefully another 10, 20 more. We'll see. I don't know.
Do you have any aspirations of becoming a PD yourself, or a music director or anything like that?
Maybe a music director. I don't know if I could handle the pressure of being a program director. That's a lot of decisions, and I don't know if I could handle that, but I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I think
One day at a time.
I think I feel the same way. But when we talk about making changes and evolving this art form, it seems like positions of power that's where you kind of have to be to really make some of these changes. But, I definitely know, being a WUOT alum myself, and you can speak to the fact that Todd and all the other staff members really give you autonomy over your programming and what you want listeners to hear.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the things that I love most about my job is that they really do trust the host to produce their own program and to, kind of infuse it with their own personality and their own experiences. And because of that, I feel like I do have an opportunity to kind of make an impact or make a change in the music that I choose to play. And I love that.
And you're from Appalachia originally, so you can really, program your music and really curate all of the sounds for an audience that, the music speaks to their experience and y'all's environment down there.
That's right. Yeah, I think so. I love such a wide variety of music, from bluegrass to classical and pop and musical theater, and I try to get a little sprinkling of all of that in my programming, so it's not just traditional classical. And one of the exciting things that's happening in classical music nowadays, I think, is sort of the fusion of styles together. So you have fusion of ambient with classical and bluegrass and classical. So I love introducing that music to our audiences, and I love listening to it myself. But I just think it's fresh and exciting, and it just keeps the classical music world that much more interesting, I think.
For folks listening who don't know you, how about you give them sort of a brief background about how you got into music and how that led you into classical music radio?
Okay. Gosh, that's a long story. Well, I don't know. I can summarize. So I am a pianist. I started playing when I was 4 years old and went to Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina to study piano performance and music therapy.
Go. I forget the mascot there.
Nears, Mountaineers, go Nears.
Go Nears.
That's right. And then a couple of years after graduating, I decided to go back to grad school at the University of Tennessee to study collaborative piano, because I really love collaborating with other musicians and making music with other musicians. So I decided to focus on that. And while I was in school, I needed a weekend job, and they were looking for student announcers here at WUOT. So I signed up for that because I just thought it sounded like a lot of fun, and it fit my schedule, and I thought, why not? Let's go for it. And I ended up loving it, and they kept me on as a weekend announcer as they sort of phased out the student announcers with automation. And then the morning concert host retired, and they kept me on, and the rest is history.
Yeah, and the morning concert happens from 9 to noon Eastern time at WUOT. Mm-hmm. I wonder if there is a sort of music that, when I hear the phrase morning concert, I think about morning music. Do you think about the time of day when you're putting your show together?
I do a little bit. I don't start off my show with anything too bombastic or challenging. What I try to do, and this is kind of a challenge, because what I try to do, the morning concert comes out of Morning Edition, and I want to keep some of those news listeners. So I try to think, what's going to keep their ear hooked. And I don't really know it could be different for every person. So, sometimes I'll start off with a really familiar overture, or maybe something new and different to listen to, or maybe a little bit of movie music. So just kind of start off with something short and ear-catching, hopefully, and move into, easier listening music at first, and then towards the end, I get a little bit more adventuresome with my programming.
Yeah, and that's what I always love to hear. But but back when I was living in Knoxville and working with you at WUOT, I remember one of the first things I would listen to each morning is your show. I would actually use the app. I wouldn't turn on a radio, but I would use the phone app and just to see what kind of mood you're in for the day. And and I feel like I could tell based on those first few pieces, especially as I'm sure you are, I'm thinking about this time next year when we'll be in the heat of all of these all of the election drama. So I remember last year, maybe during the inauguration or something, you made sure the music was extra calming, extra soothing for people to center themselves. So
yeah, I try to think about what's going on in current events and what kind of music might be needed in response to that. So yeah, I remember that day. I think I needed it myself personally. I was feeling a lot of anxiety that day, and I think a lot of people were. But I heard from a number of listeners who actually really, really appreciated that programming on that particular day. So I think it did help some people and speak to some people.
Oh, man, and hearing you tell that story is just making me miss just being there at WUOT and, thinking about how complimentary our shows were, because I think I took the more angry approach. But
yeah, I love that. I thought it was great.
Now, before we get too far away, in your when you were talking about your background, you said that you went to the University of Tennessee to study collaborative art, to be a collaborative artist, a collaborative pianist. This is a conversation that I know the two of us have had a lot, collaborative pianist versus that other A word that we all hate, accompanist. For folks who just have no idea the nuance of using the phrase collaborative artist or collaborative pianist, talk to them why that is so important as opposed to the word accompanist.
I love that question. So, I mean, it's, I guess, I don't know, I jokingly say it's the PC term for accompanying, but it just elevates the pianist to an equal role to their musical partner. A lot of times when you hear the word accompanist, you think a subordinate role or a background, but so much of the literature that is written for a solo instrument and piano accompaniment is very much a partnership.
Yeah.
And so by saying collaborative piano, I feel like that elevates the role of the pianist to that equal partnership. And a collaborative pianist also refers to not just, when you think of like maybe a sonata for violin and piano, but it can also refer to a pianist who plays for a choir, which is something that I sort of specialize in. And that is a very different type of accompanying. As a choral accompanist, you're not just plunking out notes. You're listening to the sections in the choir and you're trying to pick out, okay, which section is struggling here? How can I help out the director? What can I bring his or her attention to that needs to be focused on? You're like an extra set of ears for the director. And then, of course, you have to learn the accompaniment, which sometimes can be very challenging depending on the piece. And so
depending on the performers, I'm sure.
Yes. So it's a lot of different things. And the program at the University of Tennessee really focuses a lot on vocal coaching, which is an entirely different sect of being a collaborative pianist. So, being a vocal coach for an opera company is a very demanding, challenging job. So it's, I think that term is a little bit more encompassing for the variety of roles that a pianist can have, not as a soloist.
Right. And, as times change and as we move forward, I feel like more folks are privy to that sort of language and the culture behind that language. But yeah, that's just one of the many things that I learned from you, from working with you. I'm sure, over your tenure as a radio host, things have changed a lot. And recently, with the rise of the hashtag hashtag Me Too movement, the International Women's March that's been getting a lot of attention lately. You've taught me that there are conversations there within classical music. Before we get too deep into that conversation, I'm just curious: is this something that you've always been thinking about? Maybe in year 2 or 3 as morning concert host, were you thinking about some of the inequities that women see in classical music as it applies to your programming?
Not really, no. It's definitely been something that's evolved over the years. I mean, I guess, I don't know, the first moment I can think about was when I was in grad school and I was taking a vocal lit class, and we learned about the songs of Clara Schumann, who was not a composer that I'd really learned about even in undergrad, which is, it's terrible. I mean, she's a brilliant composer and pianist and very important figure to learn about, in my opinion. And I just learned about all of the beautiful songs that she wrote, and that, piqued my interest. And I kind of thought, well, why am I just now learning about her? And, I think I programmed some of her music, and Amy Beach is another composer. Sort of the well-known female composers. And I think maybe the second thing that kind of heightened my interest in allowing that to influence my programming was an interview that I did with a composer, Sarah Kirkland Snyder. And she was a guest at the Big Ears Festival, or one of her compositions was performed there. And we spoke about the challenges that she encountered as a woman composer. And I was really surprised to hear about all of the many challenges that she encountered. And so that kind of made me think about it a little bit more. And then just hearing and reading more articles written from female conductors and their experiences, and then with the Me Too movement, each one of these events has really kind of heightened my knowledge and awareness of how little focus is given to women composers and conductors in particular. And it's really changed how I looked at that and how I program a little bit.
One of the conversations that I found most challenging when we talk about racial equity and gender equity in classical music is identifying why we have to have these conversations. From your perspective, why do you think Clara Schumann, why do you think names like hers have been buried for so long? What do you think the forces are, or the powers that be, that maintain that status quo in classical music?
That's a complex question, I think, or a complex answer. I mean, number one, just the majority of music has been written by white men, just in percentages. But secondly, women just didn't compose. They weren't allowed to. It wasn't socially acceptable. The few brave women who did, Fanny Mendelssohn comes to mind. Well, she wrote music, but she couldn't publish it, although her brother did under her name. So it's just like all of these challenges that prohibited women from composing, or from their works being published or respected, I think. And so they were just kind of ignored, or, I think their music was often looked upon as, oh, that's nice, light music to be performed in the home, but isn't meant for the concert stage. And so maybe it wasn't shared in that way. And I mean, I can say for myself that it's not something that I intentionally thought about programming until really this year. So I was in a meeting, not work related, I'll say that. I was in a meeting and we were discussing programming, and someone in the meetings mentioned programming an entire show featuring women composers. And another person in the meeting said that, well, there aren't very many female composers to choose from. And I knew that to be untrue. And at first I was really kind of angry at this person.
Yeah, as you should have been.
And then I thought, well, we're not hearing them. I'm not playing them very much on the radio, and and it's really the same handful of women composers. I can do better. What can I do to share this music with our audiences and to educate them and to let them know there are many, many women composing out there. Their music just isn't being heard. And so I made a personal challenge to myself from that day. This was, I think it was in March, to program at least one work by a woman composer on my show every day. And I'm happy to say that I have done that. And I've repeated composers a couple times, but I haven't repeated pieces of music. And there's still so much more to hear. And I am learning about so many composers that are brand new to me. And it's just been a really exciting, fulfilling challenge for myself to discover these women who are writing fantastic music and sharing it with our audiences.
Yeah, and I love that goal of yours, having a piece of music by a woman on for every show. My personal challenge to myself since I came here to American Public Media was to make sure that every hour of my programming includes, either a piece of music by a person of color, a woman, or a living composer. And more, I have to say, more often than not, I meet that personal requirement of mine by incorporating music by a woman. And there's so many names that I've learned, like Cécile Cheminot, who I had never heard of, or, a lot of these living women composers who really offer, a different perspective on this music. And along with that personal goal of mine came, a look at how I talk about this music and my language. And I tend to use the word woman or woman composer as it applies to the conversation or my presentation of the music. And I know a lot of people will say female composer. Do you have a personal opinion or any sort of way of thinking when it comes to the word woman versus the word female in relation to these conversations?
Mm-hmm. I actually use them interchangeably, and I perhaps I don't know like the correct usage of each word, but I interchange them equally, I think.
Yeah, and the only reason I kind of dedicate myself to using the word woman, because female is, a woman is a female human from my perspective. And of course, I always listen, and I always make sure that, I'm not making these decisions without making sure that I'm, trying to learn from women or female humans. How, even talking to you now about this, I feel like I have to tread lightly because I don't want to say the wrong thing. But, these days, a lot of people respond to conversations like these by saying, "Oh, well, I have to, I have to be so careful," and it's considered by many a radical idea to have these conversations. And I leave it to, if I have the opportunity to listen to a woman talk to me about these issues, I do, and that can be a challenge for me. But it's also I consider it a blessing, if you will, a privilege to really get to have those conversations and change music for the future.
Agreed. Yeah, I think it's really important that we have these conversations. Absolutely.
What do you say to the person who says, well, the music is just the music? Why does it matter who wrote it? Or why does it matter to showcase the fact that this composer was a woman or a woman of color or whatever? What's your response to that thinking?
That's a good question. I don't think I've ever had anyone ask me that.
I definitely have.
Wow. Well, I think as women, we have a different perspective. We have a different voice, and it deserves to be heard. And especially when we're talking about, I don't know if I should say especially, but, in the past and in the 19th century, even today, all of the challenges that women encountered to try to pursue their art, I think that that story needs to be told. And not ignored, not just like, here's another piece of music by a composer. Yeah, I don't know. I think it is important to note that this was written by a woman, and here are the challenges that she encountered to create this piece of art, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. So, one evening I was airing music by Amy Marcy Shaney Beach. I tend to say her full name,
Love
and
it.
I kind of told the story about how her music for many years was published under the name HHA Beach, her
Mm-hmm.
husband's name, and how
Mm-hmm.
finally we're recognizing her, even all the way down to saying her name when it comes to this music. And someone basically came to me with, well, I mean, that is her name. She is Mrs. HHA Beach. What's the problem? But I feel like I have to constantly combat all of this sort of thing. And I'm curious your opinion of this, but from my perspective, that sort of thing wasn't so innocent. It seemed more purposeful, considering the environment Amy lived in. Her husband didn't want her touring and getting her music out there because he believed that she, should be in the home, just like many
Mm-hmm.
men of that day did, maybe some men now. And for me, that's why that perspective is important. What's your take on that story specifically of Amy Marcy Shaney Beach?
Oh, I get kind of angry when I think about that.
Go off. Go ahead and go off.
But, music is a part of yourself, especially, I mean, if you're performing or writing it, that's coming from you. That's something that you create. And to think that somebody would, I mean, even in a husband-wife relationship, which of course is very close, but for someone...
And was different in those days as well, that dynamic.
Yes, that is true. But for someone to try to take ownership of something that someone else created, especially something so personal, I don't know. I think that is, that's just wrong. And, and I mean, I know like times were different back then, and traditions were different, expectations were different. But I mean, I think the fact that she had to publish her music under the name of Mrs. HHA Beach is so telling as to the challenges that women encountered and just what society expected of them and how society viewed them as secondary or lesser than. And, why we probably don't hear their music more often, because they were silenced.
And it makes me cringe. It almost makes my eyes water to think about all of the women whose music we will never get to hear and who will never know about because of that silencing and quelling their experiences. And when I think about the word silencing, I think about the opposite, really stepping forward and making your voice known. I think I mentioned earlier the Me Too movement. And, there was a day, at least on social media, when it seems like all of that came to a head. I saw all of these women on my timeline talking about their contemporary challenges as women, many of which who have been sexually abused, sexually assaulted during their lives, and for it to be such a common thing just among the women in my networks really broke my heart. I had no idea, and that changed my whole perspective on everything. And that's even crossed over into the world of classical music. I'm sure you've heard the story of Laura St. John, and I only name her because she has since come out with with her side of the story as all of that relates to her time at the Curtis Institute. Have you heard about that?
Oh, yes.
What was your reaction to hearing about that?
I was initially shocked, and then just a mixture of emotions, anger and disgust at her instructor there, and admiration for her bravery, and all of those things at once.
I mean, and when we use, we often use the word bravery, but sometimes I think we kind of gloss over how brave you have to be to come out and accuse, a member of such a big classical music institution of something like that. Can you speak to why we call women brave? Because I feel like we don't spend quite enough time even acknowledging that truth.
I mean, I think because you don't know what the reaction is going to be when you come out with this truth that's very personal and traumatic, and you share it with the world, and you don't know what that reaction is going to be. You don't know if it's going to be, you're going to have to relive these events all over again and keep defending yourself all over again. And what's the outcome going to be? Is this person going to be punished? Is it going to change anything? What's the point? These are all of the questions that women ask themselves. Is it worth the battle? And I think with the Me Too movement, we are seeing that it is worth the battle because everything is finally coming out in the open, and people are realizing that these kinds of things happen all too often, and it's not acceptable. And but it's only because people are being brave and coming forward and telling their stories, regardless of what that reaction might be from people. And and I know that I've read, on the social media, people attacking her and questioning her story and not believing her. And then on the flip side, many, many people supporting her and, applauding her for her bravery. So it's, I think she's a very strong person, and it took a lot of courage for her to come forward.
Have you been able to address these conversations on the air, on the radio during the morning concert?
Not really. Not really. I would say that I did play a piece of music. Oh gosh, is it Jessie Montgomery? #Me Too. Did she write that?
Oh, I'm not sure if she did, but shout out to Jessie Montgomery, a very important living woman composer.
Yes. Well, it's the Chicago Sinfonieta's new release called the W Project, which is conducted by May and Chen. It has a piece on it.
And we actually featured that recording not too long ago. My boss, Julie Almacher, she has a weekly special called New Classical Tracks, and I think last week or the week before, that was the featured recording.
Oh, it is a fantastic album. Just a really great selection of music. But there is a piece called #Me Too on there, and so I talked about that piece and what it's about, and what the liner notes say about the composer's impetus for writing that. And so in that way, I indirectly kind of talk about it, but it's a challenging topic to address on a classical show.
It is.
I don't know. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, because people always want to separate music from the rest of the world. But my argument is that music exists in the world, so has connections to everything that goes on in the world, good, bad, and everything in between. And I think the conversation we've had here so far is just proof of that the oppressive culture that women have had to live under historically also applies to the women who tried to write music, and then that manifests in our knowledge of that music. And it can be such a difficult topic, but again, an important one to kind of realize. I mean, I don't know, and I know that we've talked a lot about the separation of the music versus the news or whatever's happening in the world. But for me, when there's such a direct connection, I can't help but to dig into that.
Absolutely, yeah. I think I find it easiest to talk about when it's through the music. Actually, when you were just talking, it came to mind the opera or the composer who won the Pulitzer Prize in music this year. It was for, what is her name? Ellen Reed, for her opera Prism, which is about the topic of rape and sexual assault. And so I was fortunate to interview her about that work. And so we talked about that topic through that piece of music. So I think with those opportunities where you're able to speak with artists and do interviews, you can get a little bit more in depth into these topics.
Yeah. And earlier today, I shared with you a tweet that I saw. I'm not going to give that man a shout out because I don't particularly think he deserves one. But basically, in his tweet, he was talking about how this quote unquote equity is just an attack on the white male. Give me your reaction to that.
That is ridiculous.
Isn't it? And what's scary, and if I can just quickly add, what's scary to me about statements like that is that he's in a position of power in classical music.
Yes. Yeah. So you sent me that tweet, and I didn't know who it was, and I did a little Googling and found out who he was, and was shocked that yes, he's in a place of power, and that I don't know why it surprised me. I guess I just hoped that people in that position would be a little bit more, I don't know, what's the word? Respectful and worldly? I don't know. I can't think of the word, but...
Or just more aware,
Yes, aware. That's the word. But sadly, no, that's not the case. Yeah, I mean, it's not an attack on white men at all. I mean...
Necessarily.
I mean, their music is still going to be performed and heard in the majority, for sure. I mean, even like take myself for example. I'm programming one piece in a 3-hour show a day by a woman composer, and I mean these can vary in length from 5 minutes to an hour, you know, depending on the piece of music. And the rest of the show is, it's mostly Beethoven and Schumann and Chopin, and it's just because we are focusing on equal representation and equality doesn't mean that it's like going to take away from anyone else. I don't understand why anyone would think that. I mean, they're obviously feeling attacked for whatever reason.
Right, they're feeling threatened. Mm-hmm. And somebody I've read a lot of is Malcolm X. I know a lot of people find him problematic. I like his writing. And one thing he said was that racism only exists where there's a threat. And I feel like when we talk about gender equity, specifically in classical music, there are folks that are beginning to feel threatened. And I don't know, as a man, I'm not a white man, but as a man, I don't particularly feel threatened by gender equity as much as I feel excited that we get to learn more and that we get to hear from composers and hear from artists who have historically been overlooked.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think, as I said earlier, women have a different perspective, and I think it only enriches our, experience as human beings, and, it should be heard. And if any man feels threatened by what a woman can do, let that be a challenge and just, make yourself that much better. I don't know. I mean, I don't understand why we all can't just collaborate.
You're more polite than I am. I'll say if there are any men that feel threatened by this, they can just go lay down. Just go take a nap, and maybe when you wake up, you'll feel better. All right. So, and there's so many, organizations, so many classical music institutions that are, being equitable and really tackling this subject in a real way. And one of them is the American Composers Forum. I'm very proud to sit on the board of the ACF, and it's currently run by a very phenomenal woman. Shout out to Vanessa Rose. And at our last board meeting, a conversation came up that I found especially challenging. So in regroup, I'll give you a little background. In regrouping the organization's core values, the ACF has decided that they're going to focus on racial equity. And the conversation came up, well, what does that mean for white women? Are we leaving their work out of this? And the argument was that white women have a level of privilege that women of color or women who live with disabilities may not experience in their lives. I'm still wrestling with that in my mind. Do you, as a white woman, I have to ask you, do you feel like you hold a level of privilege that other women don't?
I mean, I think that, short answer, yes. I came from a really fortunate background. I mean, my parents worked really hard. They weren't millionaires by any means, but they could always afford lessons for me, and they could buy a piano. And I didn't have to work while I was in high school. I could focus on my music, and then I was able to go to college. So, I'm very grateful for those opportunities that were available to me that I recognize are not available to everyone, who, may not be able to afford music lessons or to go to college, or
Right.
maybe they have to work their way through high school and they can't focus on their passions. And so in that way, I definitely recognize my privilege. In terms of I don't know. Yeah, I'll end it there.
Well, yeah, and I know that's a tough question. I really have to thank you for traversing it the best way you can, because as I've mentioned, as a man, many of these conversations for me are uncomfortable, and it's really been a journey for me to recognize where my privileges lie in it all. And for me, I just think it's most important if you're thinking about those things and acknowledging those things, it plays a role into how you traverse some of the conversations, and in turn, how you do your work. And I know, you mentioned Jesse Montgomery. I know that you make sure to air and promote and celebrate music by all women, and and again, I appreciate you for that, and I appreciate you, being tapping into that vulnerable place in this conversation, because I know that's not easy.
Yeah, I feel like, of course, I do not have the perspective of a woman of color, and I would love to learn more about that perspective and their experiences. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of feel like as women, we're all on the same team. We're all have the same goals in mind. So that's how I look at it. I hope that we all just work together and support each other in our pursuit for equality.
And hopefully men like myself know when we need to sit back and listen, and listen to these conversations, and allow women to lead the charge on certain things, just so that we aren't co-opting and perpetuating a complex and a culture that has resulted in what it's resulted. So thanks to all of the magic of editing and button pushing, this is coming out the same week as your pledge drive down there in Knoxville. Quickly, can you quickly talk to me just about the importance of those sorts of things as it applies to public radio, and why it's important for everyone to support their local public radio station?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we are listener-supported public radio. I know it's different for every station, but by far our largest percentage of funding comes from our listeners, and that's a good thing, because when we choose our programming, we're not answering to some corporation who has given us a bunch of money. We are answering
headed by white men.
Right. Yeah, we are answering to our listeners, and and we have so many listeners here in Knoxville. And if everyone out there listened, gave what they were able to, then we would, our fund drive would be over in a day, probably even a couple of hours.
Yeah.
But another reason why it's important to support your local public radio station, wherever you may be, wherever you're listening, is that it really is a part of your community. And this is something that I'm realizing more and more, in that, not just with the community events that we, try to help out with and participate in, but, largely through that. But, we do work together with local organizations during the fund drive and also throughout the year, and with local businesses who partner with us. So, it all just works together. When you shop at your local business, then they're giving back to the community. And I don't know, I'm just realizing more and more the importance of becoming involved in your community and supporting that local aspect, as opposed to the greater, bigger organizations.
Yeah,
who
and
don't really have a face, you know?
right. And of course, listener support helps to keep folks like me in as many communities as possible, through music through the night. So,
That's right.
so if you're listening to Knoxville, if you're wherever you are, find a way to support your public radio station. Melanie, as we say all the time, no amount is too large or too small.
That's right.
And
You're bringing back memories.
yeah, I'm trying not to go into my pledge drive mode right now, but yeah, again, if you're listening, find out a way to give, $15 to your public radio station. You never know how far that sort of thing can go, and in turn, how you can change the life of a listener or someone who works in public radio. But before I let you go, I'll shout out Greg Hill and Todd Steed, who, without any radio experience at all, gave me a chance. And yeah, my whole life has definitely changed. So public radio is something I'll always hold dear. And if you're listening, I hope you can find a way to engage your local public radio station. Melanie, how can folks reach out to you if they would like to know more information about you? How can they listen to the morning concert? And yeah, I'll give us all of your deets.
Gladly. You can email me at mgdodson, that's DODSON, at utk.edu. You can listen to my show. It's 9 a.m. to noon. That's Eastern Standard Time, and you can stream us online at WUOT.org or download our awesome app. I think it's WUOT FM Radio or something like that. And let's see, am I leaving anything out?
I think that you have a Facebook page, an artist page.
I do, yeah. Just search for Melony Dodson, radio host, music director, and you should find me there. And I'm on Instagram as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And if there's anyone listening right now who maybe needs to be pointed in the right direction as far as uncovering music written by women, who are a few names that come to your top of your mind? Who do people need to know when it comes to women who have written music?
Definitely Clara Schumann and Amy Beach. These are two of my favorites. Trying to think of some more.
You've already mentioned Sarah Kirkland Snyder.
I love her music. She really fuses together sort of pop elements with classical, and I find it really interesting to listen to.
I'll tell you, I've been listening to a lot of Clarissa Saad lately. I think she really has some phenomenal stuff.
Yes, I love her music as well. Big fan. Jennifer Higdon, of course.
Oh, yeah,
amazing.
Pulitzer Prize winner, Grammy winner. Yeah, from East Tennessee. So shout out again to East Tennessee.
Yep.
And then I always throw into the hat, of course, the late great Florence Price for really really championing music by women of color, specifically Black women. So much music out there to discover. Melanie, you've been so generous with your time. Thanks so much, and tell everyone down at WUOT I say hello.
I will indeed. It's been great to talk to you, Garrett.
Thank you.
Melony Dodson from WUOT in conversation with Garrett McQueen, formerly of WUOT. Garrett, listening to you guys talk about your fund drives at WUOT just warmed me up all over again. It reminds me of the time spent doing fund drives at KVNO. It was just such a feeling of a team effort, that we were a Davy fighting Goliath, maybe, something like that. So it was great to hear you guys reminisce about all the time that you had together, especially fundraising. That's an important time.
Yeah, I didn't listen to much public radio before I started working for public radio. So, I think WUOT was a really phenomenal training ground for me. I went in there with no experience. My first pledge drive was actually, I'm trying to think, it was not long after I had started. So I think maybe 3 weeks, and then I had to, do a pledge drive. But, the team down there is just so amazing. And like I said in my interview, please, whether you're listening where we are here in Minnesota or wherever your local public radio station is, call them today and give, I don't know, $10, $15, because the smallest bit goes the furthest the furthest distance. As this is airing, as I mentioned in the interview, it's WUOT's membership drive, their pledge drive. So yeah, give them especially if you're listening down there, give them a call. And I would say the phone number, maybe the phone number has changed since then, but they have the phone number on their website, WUOT.org. If you're listening, I'm sure it gets repeated over and over again. So please make your contribution. Scott, a lot of people, we talk about how important pledge drives are and how much we love to do them, but the reality is a lot of people just hate listening to it.
Sure.
Yeah, it seems like an interruption in their life. What's your response to the person who says, "Oh, I hate listening to the pledge drive. I can't wait till it's over."
Contribute, and it
it'll be
will
over.
happen. There's people that like to wait and be one of the last ones to get you over the finish line.
Yeah.
Okay, I know that's exciting, but please do it early.
Yeah.
Okay, so it'll cut down. Seriously, it'll cut down.
Yeah. Well, and one of my big pitches always on pledge drives is that we have to make sure that this public radio is here for the next generation so that, other folks can get to hear it for many more years. And on the next Opus of TRILLOQUY, we actually, dive into conversations with the next generation. So earlier this year, I went to a local school here in St. Paul, the Jennings School, and I asked the kids a question. I said, "What is your favorite, quote unquote, classical music?" And before I asked them that question, I defined the word classical as music that's classic to an experience or a culture. So there are some kids who, had some classical music that they were able to talk to me about, but I also wanted to validate the kids who may not necessarily know much about classical music.
Yeah.
So on the next Opus of TRILLOQUY is going to be a sort of rhapsody in which we hear from different kids what their favorite sorts of music is, why they consider it classic to their experiences. I'm looking forward to us diving into that and hearing what some of these kids had to say.
We're going back to school next time on TRILLOQUY.
Now, as a special shout out to WUOT and their pledge drive, Scott, I thought we would end today's Opus with a little jingle that I wrote that Melanie and I actually performed together live on the air. I brought my ukulele into the control room. Melanie had a kazoo, and we sang a little song to the melody of Champs-Élysées, the famous French pop tune. So,
nice.
So I don't know if we actually titled this song, but it's called the WUOT Jingle. So here it is. Thanks for listening.
It's Pledge Drive Week at UOT. We need your help so that we can give to you the programming you love and you need.
We ask that you pick up your phone and make a pledge. Then you'll know you've done your part to keep us here for tunes and the news.
WUOT. WUOT. 865-974-5500. Call and make your pledge for WUOT. Keep going, so good. We've sung our song just for you.
He's strumming strings.
She's on kazoo. Call and make your pledge for WUOT. 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 865-974-5500. Call and make your pledge for WUOT.